Well, welcome everyone. How you doing today? Just a little test to see if you're awake. Balcony folks, how excited are you that the balcony's open today? I don't believe you. So it's good. Glad that you're here. Thank you for braving the snow. Look at that. 2 Sundays in January, 2 snow days. Come on. Let's make it 52 for 52, yeah? No? Okay, we won't. Don't worry. Glad that you're here. We're going to dig into this series that we've been going through the last couple of weeks about relationships. We called it Pillow Talk because relationships are intimately interwoven in every facet of our lives. Whether we're intentional about them or we just let them happen, relationships are everywhere. Pillow Talk, it has that layer of intimacy and connection. Today, our theme is about faithfulness. We're going to look at how do we build faithfulness in our relationships. If you've got a Bible, I want you to turn it open to the latter portion of the book of Matthew. Okay, the latter portion of the book of Matthew, we're going to be looking at chapters 26 and 27 primarily. And if you have a digital device, just open up your YouVersion Bible app. You can follow it along there. It'll help you get to exactly what we're going to be talking about from this text. We're going to look at one of the things that I think even Jesus wrestled with when it came to his relationships, faithfulness. Now, he had this group of people that was most close to him, his closest friends. There were 12 of them, but there was one gentleman in particular that kind of did a swerve relationally with Jesus, and his name is Judas. Now, Judas sometimes gets a really bad rap. He's the guy that sold Jesus out. He's the guy that betrayed his best friend. He's the guy that did this, that, and the other thing. But the truth is, you and I are more like Judas than we would ever care to admit. Here's some interesting things about Judas. He was one of these 12 people that followed Jesus, the disciples, but his story of how he started following Jesus is not recorded in the biblical text. You've got stories of how, like, Peter, also known as Simon at the time, started to follow Jesus. You got stories about Matthew, this tax collector, that started to follow Jesus. You got stories about Andrew. You got stories about Philip and Nathaniel. You've got all these other stories of these other individuals that started following Jesus, but Judas is one of those ones that his story was left out. But you know that he's a part of this team because he's listed as one of these 12 individuals following Jesus. Now, Judas's role in that group was interesting. I don't know how they decided it, but he became in charge of the money, the resources for that band of friends. And the text tells us in some of the other verses that kind of talk about Judas, that Judas liked to skim off the top. So what he would do is he would literally take money for himself from the pool of money that they had together as a team. He was in charge of the finances, and there was no checks and balances in place, so he could do whatever he wanted to do with that money. It's interesting. When it comes to the latter portion of Jesus' life, he's starting to get really intentional about communicating to his friends he's not going to be here for forever. He was here for a purpose. There's coming a time where he's going to actually have to die so that they can live. Really weird concept to die so somebody else could live. That's what he was talking about. He's this Messiah that they've been waiting for. He is everything that they could ever wish for and hope for and need in a friend. And now he's saying to them, I'm not always going to be with you. So a little bit of a tension point. We get to this moment where it's in his last days, and Judas plays a really critical, interesting role. Let's pick this up in the text. If you wouldn't mind turning with me to Matthew chapter 26. I'm going to be reading first verses 17 through 25. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover meal for you?" "As you go into the city," he told them, "you will see a certain man. Tell him, 'The teacher says, my time has come, and I will eat the Passover meal with my disciples at your house.' So the disciples did as Jesus told them and prepared the Passover meal there. When it was evening, Jesus sat down at the table with the 12 disciples. While they were eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." Greatly distressed, each one asked in turn, "Am I the one, Lord?" He replied, "One of you who has just eaten from this bowl with me will betray me. For the Son of Man must die, as the Scriptures declared long ago. But how terrible it will be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born." Judas, the one who would betray him, also asked, "Rabbi, am I the one?" And Jesus told him, "You have said it." So you get to this crescendo moment in the life of Jesus. He's having this last meal. Jesus knows it's his last meal. His friends don't yet know it's their last meal with their best friend there. And he's saying, one of you is going to betray me. And Judas ends up being the one. The story continues. Here's what it says later on in that chapter, verses 47 through 49. And even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They'd been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people. The traitor Judas had given a prearranged signal. "You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss." So Judas came straight to Jesus. "Greetings, Rabbi," he exclaimed, and then gave him the kiss. The tension continues after this point. Here's the crescendo for Judas. Chapter 27, verse 3 of the book of Matthew. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and elders. "I have sinned," he declared, "for I have betrayed an innocent man." "What do we care?" they retorted. "That's your problem." So it's a snapshot of kind of this finishing moment with Judas, but there's so much more to his story. That's how he ends. We don't know how he begins because the Bible doesn't tell us how he started following Jesus, but we know that he was following Jesus, and the followers of Jesus, the disciples, were involved in everything that Jesus did. So imagine being one of those in that moment. People who were following Jesus that closely, eating with him, walking with him, moving with him, laughing with him, seeing all these things unfold right before your eyes. Judas saw all the miracles. Judas witnessed Jesus preaching. Judas even participated in some of those things. In the book of Luke, there's this story where it talks about Jesus sending out the disciples to do the exact things that he had done by healing the sick, casting out demons, and preaching the good news of the gospel to people who had yet to experience and encounter the power of the living God. In all these other towns around the region where Jesus had been preaching, he sent them out to do this. Judas was one of those. Judas did all of those things, and yet he still found a way to betray his friend. Now, if I asked for a show of hands and I asked you if you've ever been betrayed relationally, my guess is every one of you could have a story of betrayal. I don't want to focus on the betrayal. I want to focus instead on the dichotomy that this betrayal that Judas does with Jesus presents to us relationally. Instead of focusing on the betrayal, why don't we focus on what was missing in that relationship? Why don't we focus on faithfulness? Why is it that Judas, in his relationship with Jesus, did not have a faithful connection with Christ? Why is it that another friend who betrayed or denied knowing Jesus, Peter, had a restored relationship with Jesus when confronted at a Jesus kind of trial, when confronted by other people like, "Hey, do you know this guy?" He denied Jesus 3 different times, essentially doing a very similar thing to what Judas did. Yet Peter is known as somebody who remains faithful in his relationship with Jesus. So what's missing from Judas and what's present in the life of Peter? And how can we ensure that in our own relationships, not only with Christ, but with one another, we are known for our faithfulness more than our betrayal? Because newsflash, if you haven't yet hurt somebody in a relationship, it's going to happen. It might happen tomorrow. We are people. We are broken. We are imperfect, and imperfect things create imperfect habits and imperfect connections with other imperfect things. Tension's going to happen. But the difference I want to focus on is, what does faithfulness look like? And I want to talk about two relational movements that we can make in any relationship that we have starting now, today, in order to build faithfulness instead of betrayal. The first one is this. We have to make a shift and a movement away from a transactional mindset when it comes to relationships into an investment mindset. For those of you who are familiar with finance terms, you're like, that sounds like the same thing. A transaction and an investment sounds like the same thing. They are very different mindsets. I can't help but think this is exactly how Jesus was approached in his relationship with Judas. He was approached from a transactional mindset. Too many of us approach a relationship and think, what can I get out of this thing? If you and I, we go to, say, Burger King or Popeyes or some other place, we are expecting a transactional exchange in that encounter. When we go to the counter and we place our order for food, we're expecting that when we give our finances, something will come back in return. And if it doesn't come back the way we thought or intended, oh my word, that's when all hell might break loose. We have this transactional mindset. It's so embedded in our North American culture that we've taken that into our relational construct as well. And Judas, I believe, personifies what a North American would do from a relational standpoint in the absence of knowing what faithfulness is all about. We treat relationships as transactional. Don't believe me? Let me tell you this little story from my own life that I bet you can identify with. I grew up in a small town. In a small town, there's not an abundance of relationships to be had. So you have to be thankful for whatever relational connection you do have with who's in your town. My friend Christopher lived 3 blocks away from me, and he had Treasure Island, the video game, for his computer, and I had a trampoline in my backyard. Our relationship was built on the transactional exchange of whose house we would play at, depending on what medium of play we wanted to do more than the other. We would call each other on the old school landline phone. I had a rotary, so I had to put my finger in this dial and turn it around and then wait for it to come all the way back, clicking. And if you got it all messed up, you had to hang it up and start again. I had one of those, and I would call Christopher and I would say, hey, dude, can I come to your house to play? And he'd be like, oh, no, man, I'm kind of feeling a little sick. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. You can stay in your room and I'll just be on your computer. He's like, nah, I don't think my mom's going to be cool with that. Okay, that's fine, cool. Well, I guess I'll just go out on my trampoline. He's like, oh, man, I'm feeling better. I'll be over in 15 minutes. We had this relational, transactional exchange in our friendship early on. It wasn't until we grew older that we understood the value of relationship, absence of things. How many times do we look at our relationship with Jesus and say, the only reason why I'm connecting with you, Jesus, is because you give me something? You give me new life, new mercies every day. That's why I'm here. You give me salvation. That's why I'm here. If we have that approach to our relationship with Jesus, we have a transactional mindset, not an investment one. Now, I get it. If we go to a fast food restaurant and we give them something, we're expecting something back. Imagine if you just went to that restaurant and said, hey, I'm investing in you. They would not know what to do with that, would they? I just want to give you this as an investment. Around Christmas time, I went to one of our local gas stations to fill up my car, and lo and behold, somebody, before I had gotten to that pump, legitimately paid for the next person to use that pump to fill up their vehicle. I didn't know what to do with that investment. I literally was checking for cameras. It was like, am I going to be like written up in the recorder here in Times, and I'm the guy that's just like bailing from the pump? I had to go into the attendant and be like, this is a really weird question. Like, somebody prepaid on this pump. He's like, oh, yeah. Somebody did that before you got here. I was like, whew, I'm not stealing. Sure felt good, though, to put $55 in. I was like, yeah. So if you're in this room and that was you, thank you for that Christmas gift. I blew it all on food that week. So sometimes we don't know what to do with an investment. If somebody like comes to you and says, I want to give you this, immediately some of our response internally is like, oh shoot, now I owe them something. And we struggle with that because we approach that mindset in our relationship with Jesus. And if we look at Judas, that's what he was all about. Maybe he decided to follow Jesus because he knew that something cool was about to happen. And when the cool wore off, he was no longer willing to be associated with Jesus. Do you ever think like we approach our relationship with even like a gathered community like church like that? Like, I'm going to go to church as long as I get something out of it. But if I'm not getting something out of it, like then I'm not going to go. What if church was about a relationship, an investment, and not a transaction? Like every single week when we gather together in person or online, when you aren't present, when your person isn't there, the body suffers. It's not about me. It's not about my ego. Like, oh my goodness, more people. Sweet. The literal body, the community of Jesus suffers because you aren't there, because you aren't investing, because you aren't showing up, bringing yourself with all the things that God has gifted you with, your experiences, the way you think, your pains, all of it, that's His. And when you're not there and when you're not investing it, the body suffers. If we're going to build faithfulness in our relationships with Jesus and one another, we have got to move away from a transactional mindset. If I only parent my children because they give me something, I would have stopped parenting at week number 2. Because all I was getting was dirty diapers and spit up. Right? And then we're like, oh, they're learning to smile. Nope, that's just gas. We have got to move away from this transactional mindset. Judas never made that shift. And because he never made that shift, he could never build faithfulness in his walk with Jesus, which is ludicrous because he was with him for 3 years. Intimately connecting with him, sharing meals, witnessing miracles, even himself, praying for people and seeing them healed right before his eyes. He was involved in everything and he still missed it. He missed it. He missed Jesus in the moment. If we want to build faithfulness in our relationships, we have to move away from a transactional mindset. We've got to adopt an investment mindset. One that shows up and keeps showing up. My friend Judd is the personification of this for me. I am terrible at reaching out to him, but he keeps showing up. He keeps randomly texting me. He keeps randomly calling me because he's stoking that relationship. He's investing in it. And there are times where I feel terrible and I want to apologize to him, and I've tried to apologize, and he says, don't worry, I'm investing. I'm not here for a transaction. Can we make that move? Can we shift away from a transactional mindset? Can we embrace an investment mindset? Can we understand that's exactly what Jesus does with us? He's investing in you, not because he actually wants something from you. I know that's crazy because we say that Jesus gave his life for everybody, and that is true. He would want everybody to choose to embrace the investment that he has given on our behalf. But he also realizes that some of us won't. That some of us will walk away from that investment because we think it'll cost us too much. If we want to build faithfulness in our relationships, we've got to move. We've got to move from that transactional into an investment. Here's the second movement that we have to do. We've got to move from being a pretender to a defender. We've got to move from being a pretender to a defender. Here's what the Apostle Paul writes about when he talks about living as children of the light. He's referring to how do we do this whole life together? What does it look like to do community with one another? Verse 29, he says this in particular from chapter 4 in the book of Ephesians. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. Let me read that again. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. When I think about the movement from a pretender to a defender and think about it through the filter of this relationship or absence of relationship between Judas and Jesus, I can't help but think of this. What was going on in the quiet moments of Judas's heart and mind? He was witnessing all of these things firsthand, seeing the Messiah do exactly what he said he was going to do in the lives of people, and yet it still wasn't enough. There was something off inside of him. And maybe that internal narrative became too overwhelming. Like, is this guy a crackpot? Why would he trust that person and not trust me? And maybe that's how he started to justify skimming money from the group. Maybe that's how he started to justify that, you know what? I think I'm actually going to move away from this relational connection, and I think I'm going to look for an opportunity maybe to betray my friend for 30 pieces of silver, which isn't a lot. It wasn't a title. It wasn't a once and for all lifetime supply of toilet paper. It wasn't any of those things. It was 30 pieces. That was the price. That was good enough for him. My perspective seems like he settled. Like he was looking for a way to get out of this relational entanglement, and so he settled. And so many of us do the same thing in our own earthly relationships. Like we're looking for a way out from a relationship, whether that's a marriage or even a friendship, and we go to the lowest common denominator, our own variation of 30 pieces of silver, and we sell out the other person. Maybe it's in the way that we talk about them. You have ever had anybody talk about you before? I learned a portion of German so I could understand what my elders in my family were talking about when they were talking about me. I never told them that I knew it. It was sneaky good stuff. Let me tell you, sometimes the language they were using in another language was not kind. Interesting, right? It's like church people never do that. We won't go home and talk about, oh my goodness, can you believe what so-and-so is wearing today? Do they not know there's other people in the room? Oh my goodness, can you believe Jason didn't say hi to me today? He looked right at me, and he didn't even say hello. I was talking to other people, that's why I didn't say hello. But some of us, if we're honest, in our relationships, friendships, or even in our walk with Jesus, we're more of a pretender than we are a defender. And pretenders always fall short. 3 years later, we can see Judas was nothing but a pretender. Nothing but an individual that was wanting to diminish everything that Jesus was trying to do. He didn't believe him. He didn't believe him. And so he wanted out. Even Peter, who betrayed Jesus in his own way, he wasn't a pretender. He moved to a defender. He understood the value of who Jesus was and the error of his ways. And he repented. There's a great story in John chapter 21 where Jesus has come back to life. He's been resurrected from the dead, and he's kind of interacting with select groups of people before he's ascending into heaven for the final time until his return, which we're still waiting for. And in John chapter 21, you see a group of disciples returning to what they're familiar to. Simon Peter, this guy being one of them. He was used to fishing, and so he's fishing. He's back doing what he's normally doing. He's like, and I understand that mindset. You know, you think that you're going to go one direction, and that all crumbles before you. You go back to what you know, so he's back fishing. And as they come back to the shore from fishing, they see this individual that's cooking breakfast, and they recognize that it's Jesus at some point in the conversation. And Jesus has this dialogue with him, and he's like, hey, Peter, do you love me? Peter's like, yeah, okay, feed my sheep. He asked him that 3 different times. As Peter's responding, I think he's a little bit more annoyed each time he's responding until he finally clues in that he denied Jesus 3 times. Now he's affirming his connection 3 times. There's wholeness and restoration. There's faithfulness being built. There's a movement away from being a pretender to now a defender of that relationship. If you want to grow faithfulness in your friendships, be a defender of your friends. Show up. Make sure the words that you are saying and the actions that you are engaged in that relationship are God-honoring. If they are not, you're nothing more than a pretender in that relationship. There's no faithfulness there. So don't be alarmed if they turn around and stab you in the back and betray you in some way, because what you've offered in that relationship is exactly what's coming out of it. That investment you've made was nothing but fake. There wasn't anything authentic in that relationship. Let us instead treat those relationships like Paul is reminding us in this section from Ephesians, where what we say and how we talk and how we carry ourselves actually speaks to the kind of development in that relationship that we long for. So next time somebody comes to you and says, oh my goodness, do you know so-and-so? Aren't they really weird? They changed their hair. You can be like, oh my goodness, I do know that person, and I'm so glad that they had the courage to try something new. Next time somebody comes to you and complains about something a church does or doesn't do, you can be like, oh my goodness, thank you for sharing your thought and your opinion. What does Jesus say about this? Would you pray with me about it? You redirect the conversation towards Christ. That's the difference between a pretender and defender. Somebody who just goes through the motions and just is there because they don't want to miss out on something, and somebody that actually wants to be a part of it. So when I think about relationships and I think about faithfulness, if we could do this consistently, that's what I think it means to love and live like Jesus. Because the reality is, Jesus does this well for us all of the time. He doesn't look at your relationship with him as a transactional entity. He looks at it as an investment. He doesn't look at your relationship with him as him being a pretender. He's a defender of that connection with you, of that relationship with you. He's not there to diminish who you are. He's there to enhance who you are, to help you flourish and grow and become who you've been created to be. That's who he is. That's what sets him apart from any other deity that's ever been invented. He's there to help you flourish and grow. He's there to remind you that even in your darkest moments, in your lowest of lows, those aren't wasted years or wasted emotion or wasted spaces. They are intentional. They are an investment. And at the right time and in the right moment, that investment will pay off the kingdom dividends that it's intended. My friend Christopher and I, as I said, we had a transactional relationship. And it grew over the years, culminating to this year, when his mom unexpectedly passed away from a heart-related condition. And even though we live 3,500 kilometers away from each other, I can pick up a phone and I can say, dude, I'm grieving as you grieve. That's the difference between a pretender and a defender. You show up in the moments even when it's hard. If you don't yet know who Jesus is, may I encourage you to discover him. The gospel message, maybe you've heard that phrase before, is simply this: God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting eternal life. What that means is simply this: God has a plan and a purpose and an intention behind who you are. Even the spaces and the pieces that frustrate you about you, they are intentional. And in that intention, God is simply wanting to awaken all of that dormant potential inside of you, but he will not force you into it. He lovingly just invites you to experience who he is. The rest he leaves up to you, because he's an investor, not a transactional God.